Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our fourth and final budget forum for the 2022 season. I just have a few technical notes before we get started to go over with everyone. We are joined tonight by our ASL interpreters, Jim and Heather, and they should be visible throughout the entire presentation. It looks like Jim is starting. So if you do need interpretation services, you can hover over either Jim or Heather's names, click on the three dots near their names and pin them as they start signing. If for some reason they're not visible to you at any point, a recording of this video with an interpreter visible at all times will be made available on YouTube shortly. We will be taking questions tonight at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, you can either raise your hand or use the Q&A feature at the bar along the bottom of your Zoom screen. So to raise your hand, click Raise Hand in the webinar controls along the bottom. The host will be notified that you've raised your hand, and then we will call on you to speak. You may be prompted to unmute yourself, so while you're unmuted, your profile picture and your name will be displayed and you can ask your question. And then we'll turn you back over and answer your question the best that we can. To use the Q&A feature, same thing, you'll just click on the Q&A button along the bottom of your Zoom screen. This will allow you to ask a question via text to the panelists and the host. So to ask a question, you type your question into the box and click send. You can also choose to ask your question anonymously if you do not want your name attached to the question in the Q&A. We'll either reply directly to your message via text and everyone else in the meeting will be able to see it, or we'll choose to answer your question live and whoever is answering your question will answer it out loud for the entire audience. We will attempt to answer all questions that come through tonight, either via the raised hand feature or the Q&A function. If questions are duplicates, we may try to answer them together, but we will try to get to everything tonight. Thank you for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to our host, Patrick.
Thank you, Leah. I appreciate it. My name is Patrick Cornell. I am the Assistant Director of the Operating Budget in the Office of Management and Budget in the Mayor's Administration. Before we kick off, I want to thank my team is on the call here tonight. The Department of Innovation and Performance City Channel team is helping us tonight. That is a Great Dane in the background. I apologize. It's okay. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank Bill Urbanik, Mike Strelick from the Council Budget Office are here, and Davon Brown from Councilperson Strasburger's office is also with us this evening. So I am going to jump right in and share my screen. Let's see if we can get this going. All right, how's everything looking?
Looks good.
Perfect, thank you. All right, now I need to minimize myself. Okay, cool. Here we go. So tonight, I want to run through some general information on the operating budget. I will touch on COVID-19, how it impacted the city, American Rescue Plan, and how that response to COVID is further impacting the city. I'll go through some general information about the operating budget, talk about public engagement, show some resources, and then we will take some questions at the end. Feel free, like Leah said, to type them in throughout the session or use the raise hand function on Zoom. And if you are watching on YouTube or after the fact, feel free to email us questions and we will get back to you as soon as we can. So some general information, if you've watched the kickoff presentation that's available on Engage PGH, you may have seen some of this information that I previously shared, but it's important, so I wanted to jump right back into it. The Office of Management and Budget is part of the Mayor's Administration. We have 5 functional areas. The administrative section handles things like legislation for the mayor's agenda, policies for travel, things of that nature. There's a capital, fleet, and asset management division, community development and block grant, CDBG. The operating grants and special revenue group is my team and myself, and procurement. So I would also notice, like I mentioned before, council has a separate budget office. And then I would also clarify that the CDBG program is responsible for programs that are funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So the actual CDBG program itself, Emergency Solutions Grant, Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, and the Home Investment Partnerships programs. These funding mechanisms are included as components of the capital budget. So as you can see, OMB is responsible for the initial planning and development of two budgets. The operating budget is on the left of this screen, and the capital budget is on the right. You'll notice that the operating budget is a 5-year plan and the capital budget is a 6-year plan. I hope you were able to check out the 3 forums for the capital budget that Dave Hutchinson and his team have already produced with the help of Community Affairs and IMP. If you have not, here's a quick breakdown. The operating budget funds expenditures that pay for most day-to-day governmental activities. On the other hand, the capital budget funds projects that are used to design, build, restore, retain, or purchase any city-owned asset, have a minimum value of $50,000, have a minimum useful life of 5 years, and are primarily funded via municipal bonds, which is debt issuance, pay-as-you-go, which is an annual transfer from the general fund in the operating budget, or federal and state funding. Some notes here that federal and state funding might put extra restrictions on the dollar usage above and beyond city restrictions. And also that the capital budget is not use it or lose it at the end of each fiscal year. So funds remain available until a project is delivered or they're reallocated to a more immediate need. The operating budget is use it or lose it. So at the end of every year, what isn't spent rolls into what's called the fund balance, to be used as kind of a savings bank for the city. I'll get more into that in a few minutes. So what does each budget fund? Getting more granular. The operating budget covers employee salaries and benefits, pension funding, debt payments, leases. For example, police headquarters on the north side is actually a leased facility, and the West End Healthy Active Living Center is as well. Utility payments, that's water, gas, steam, electricity. Fuel and vehicle maintenance. Oops, I skipped ongoing building maintenance. So that's going to be your regular, changing light bulbs, making sure that everything is working and functioning. Office supplies, computers and software, internet for city facilities, and professional services, which could include anything from auditing services and for accounting, the online permitting and licensing program, or software that helps IMP route 311 calls, which is obviously very important. So the capital budget funds the construction and major renovations of roads, including paving and traffic signals, bridges, public sidewalks, public parks, healthy active living centers, recreation centers, other city-owned buildings and facilities, city vehicles and heavy equipment, major new technology projects, and public neighborhood support from CDBG, which I mentioned earlier. So the capital budget is really, tangible things that you experience and as part of your daily lives as residents. One thing that is interesting to think about is the city of Pittsburgh as a municipality is a little bit different than the Pittsburgh metropolitan region or Western Pennsylvania. So the city as its own entity does not have responsibility for services outside of the 9 colored council districts on this map below. However, we do sign intergovernmental agreements to partner with neighboring boroughs and townships from time to time. For example, the borough of Wilkinsburg, which is in the part of the cutout right above District 9, we provide fire services and refuse services for them through legal agreements. Similarly, we do not have legal authority over the following. This is a long list, so bear with me. County, state, or federal roads and bridges, schools, that's Pittsburgh Public School System. Public transportation is the responsibility of the Port Authority. Health services are county function. Most human services are a county function. The jail is a county function. There are courts at the county, state, and federal level within the city limits. non-city public safety response teams, water infrastructure, it's PWSA and Alcosan, and public parking infrastructure and enforcement is the Pittsburgh Parking Authority. So on this list, one thing that's interesting to note is PWSA and the Pittsburgh Parking Authority are City of Pittsburgh authorities. So they're governmental entities that are related to the city, but they have their distinct finances, leadership, boards, etc. Again, the city does partner with these other entities via intergovernmental cooperation agreements. For example, emergency management services. There's also a co-responder model where if Mount Lebanon has a need for fire EMS services, we can respond. City services and at these levels get confusing. For example, let's think about bridges. So Fort Pitt is a federal bridge. The Liberty Bridge is a state bridge. The Three Sisters, the Clemente, Warhol, and the Rachel Carson are county bridges, and the Greenfield Bridge is a city bridge. So if you are ever having troubles, you sometimes have to stop and figure out, okay, who's responsible for this bridge? It can get confusing. So the big picture to remember for the operating budget is that money comes into the city and it routes through the Department of Finance. Finance is a separate entity. Their main task is collecting taxes, but permit fees that come in through PLI or DOMI or any other department also route through them. Once we have a revenue plan, we partner with them to work with departments to figure out how to spend that money. So money comes in to finance, filters to OMB, and we push it out to city departments, offices, bureaus for city services. So I want to take a second to think about COVID-19 and the American Rescue Plan. These are situations that are inherently going to influence the 2022 budget process, but they are separate processes in themselves. So last year, with COVID, there were major impacts. For revenue, we ended the fiscal year below budget by $56.6 million. The biggest tax categories hit were payroll prep, parking, the regional asset district county tax that we receive a portion of, and the amusement tax and facility usage fee. On the flip side, we had an increased need for personal protective equipment. We had to spend more money on things of that nature. We had to think about getting the technology available for eligible employees to work from home where possible. We had to think about how to get social distancing for employees who are unable to work from home. And we had to deploy an EMS infectious disease unit. So these were all unexpected and unanticipated costs. They weren't part of the budget. So what did we do in response? For revenue, the Department of Finance, the revenue manager, Sarah Capps, sent us weekly forecast updates. And we used these numbers to kind of gauge what was happening at any given moment. Finance used the best available data that they had at any given moment to help us figure out what the next steps would be. On the expenditure side in OMB, we enacted a hiring freeze, a travel and training freeze, when we postponed or canceled several major projects. So we ended the fiscal year below budget by $39.5 million. So we did our due diligence to spend less. But, we still brought in less than we expected. And then jumping to this last bullet, there was an overall operating deficit of $30 million at the end of the fiscal year. We did receive some aid. The Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, and Housing and Urban Development all provided aid to the city of Pittsburgh, as did Allegheny County in the form of a U.S. Department of Treasury pass-through. That was the CARES Act money. We actually didn't qualify for direct CARES funding due to our population size. That eligibility was 500,000. But we did receive money from the county to help assist, our spend for COVID. So what happens with an operating deficit of $30 million is we pull money from our fund balance, which our rainy day fund that we use for emergencies. So we fortunately did not have to lay anyone off in the city of Pittsburgh. We actually weathered things a little bit better than we had anticipated back in last March, April, May. It still impacts us now, though. So we're thinking about the 2022 budget, and that implies that we're working a year into the future. So last year, in the midst of the pandemic, we were thinking about 2021. Like I said earlier, the Department of Finance works on a forecast with all available information, but it was still, we were working on that last September, October, November, December. So we had the best information we could at the time, but that's what we needed to pass in this legal document. And it didn't look good, right? So things are slowly changing now, but at the time we weren't sure where things would look or how things would look. And the flip side of the equation is, per the Home Rule Charter, we have to have a balanced budget. So expenditures must be less than or equal to revenue in every single year of the 5-year plan. So if we're looking at significantly lower revenue in 2021, that means we have to make cuts on the operating side to get a balanced budget. So what did we do? We eliminated almost all vacant positions, over 120. We trimmed or cut non-personnel budget lines across all departments wherever possible. And we planned for a July 1st workforce reduction. We would have need to cut about 633 filled positions if federal aid didn't come through. And these changes to the expenditure side of the equation carried across all 5 years of the plan. Luckily, Congress did pass a 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan on March 11th of this year. I know my team in my office, we just breathed a huge sigh of relief. The bill includes $350 billion of federal aid that goes directly to local governments, as well as states, counties, and tribal governments. So the city of Pittsburgh is pegged to receive $335.1 million. Allowable uses as referenced in the bill are to replace lost revenue, to address negative economic impacts that are directly tied to COVID-19, and to invest in very specific categories of expenses: broadband, water, and sewer infrastructure. These funds must be spent by December 31st, 2024. You'll note that our 5-year plan goes through 2025. So that last year is still going to be a fun puzzle piece to try and figure out. And states, counties, and local and tribal governments have to follow reporting guidelines set by the U.S. Department of Treasury. This guidance is pretty strict. Everything that will be categorized into that negative economic impact bucket has to be tied to explicit data and figures that show that COVID really was the cause of some of these issues. Like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, the American Rescue Plan lowered that population threshold. So now it's $50,000, where the CARES Act was $500,000 and we had to work with the county. We did receive some direct monies from the federal government because we met their threshold. So what are we doing? The city of Pittsburgh has a plan for our American Rescue Plan funds. Resolution 315 of 2021, passed by City Council and signed by the mayor, sets up the American Rescue Trust Fund to house the federal funds. I will say the first tranche of funding is there and waiting. And here's the anticipated process flow. So right now, the administration is finalizing a draft proposal to present to the Pittsburgh Recovery Task Force, which is set up in this resolution, which consists of members of the executive and legislative branches. All initiatives have been considered through a lens of equity. I know that's a huge component for all of our elected officials. And all initiatives must comply with federal guidelines. That's the big one, is the things that we want to spend the money on have to be eligible expenses, because otherwise we have to give back the money. Inappropriate spending must be repaid to the federal government. So then the Pittsburgh Recovery Task Force will recommend a final set of initiatives to City Council. There will be public engagement, and then Council and the mayor will approve the spending plan for American Rescue funding. And then Council and the mayor will amend the 2021 budget as appropriate. Like I had alluded to, there are things that need to be restored in the 2021 budget. For example, that workforce reduction line will be eliminated. and we will shore up the operating budget as it needs to be to get us back to full capacity. We will have to revisit this plan every year. That lost revenue category has a very explicit funding calculation, and you have to have actual numbers to figure it out. So we will need 2021 audited numbers from the controller's office to be able to figure out what that bucket of funds will be for next year. So there will be a little bit of a delay for 21 actuals, 22 and 23 actuals, but we can still make estimates. So that's what we've been working through. And again, I just want to emphasize that the American Rescue Plan process and the 21 reopener are separate from this 22 budget engagement. They will filter through and influence decisions, but this current engagement platform and initiative is really focused on next year's budgets, both capital and operating. So now jumping into the fun stuff, the operating budget. So here's the operating budget cycle. I know the text is small, there's a lot going on, so I'm just going to read through it. The fiscal year begins January 1st. That's when the annual operating and capital budgets, the resolution becomes effective and they go live. January, February, March, April, May. On the operating side, we are not actively working on the next year's document. We are doing a lot of monitoring behind the scenes, special projects, catching up from end of year, closing out the prior fiscal year, et cetera. In June, we kick off public engagement. That's where we are now. We work very closely with community affairs to get your feedback and figure out what priorities should be emphasized, re-emphasized, shifted, et cetera. In July, OMB and my team will prepare budget worksheets and distribute baselines to all departments, offices, and bureaus. These divisions will submit their budget requests to OMB. Separately, finance works on revenue projections to figure out, okay, based on what we know now, what do we expect to happen in 22, and then 23, 24, 25, and next year we'll have to think about 26 as well. In August and September, OMB analysts meet with each division to discuss their baselines, requests, positions, accomplishments, and goals. We also meet with the mayor's office to work through each proposal in more detail. At the end of September, the mayor submits the preliminary operating and capital budget. OMB can make adjustments to the preliminary budget as needed. In mid-November, the mayor will formally present the operating and capital budgets to City Council as part of the State of the City address, which is required by the Home Rule Charter. After that, my team is hands off. In November and December, everything shifts over to City Council and the Council Budget Office. They hold televised budget hearings for each and every department. There is a public tax forum. This is the opportunity for department directors to interface directly with City Council. There may be revisions, there may be amendments, and then by the end of the year, City Council must approve a balanced budget. And then the whole cycle continues. One thing to note also is, how do we handle our fund accounting? The general fund is the main accounting fund for city services. This is the legal focus of the operating budget. There are other funds. The capital projects have their own funds and they are separate. Community development, they have their own funds. It is separate. There are special revenue funds. For example, the Pittsburgh Partnership does a lot of work with the State Workforce Investment Act. The Regional Asset District Trust Funds, this American Rescue Plan Trust Fund that I mentioned earlier, these are all examples of special revenues. They have explicit sources of money that is allowed to come into them and explicit allowable expenses as set by City Council. The last group of funds are fiduciary funds. These are ones where we're just really the custodian. An example would be the pension funds. So we manage these funds on behalf of for pension explicitly for retired employees. And then a reminder that the Controller's Office is a separate branch of government, and they are responsible for city accounting and monitoring of all funds. So what's in the operating budgets? The quick rundown, first, there is a budget guide, and it has a lot of what I think is useful information as to how city finances work and function. There's a 5-year financial forecast, which is kind of the beating heart overall summary of the operating document. There are sections on revenue, there are sections on expenditures. Each department has its own section that's broken out. There's background information, a summary of all positions within that department, and then we break down each budget line into what we call subclasses and object accounts, which gets a little more granular in the accounting system. There are trust funds and grants, which, as I mentioned, are technically in special revenue funds, but we put some of this information and expected spending plans into the budget for residents to understand what the purposes are and what the funds are used towards. There's an organizational chart of the whole city, salary tables, debt service tables, and the state required pension funding levels. It's a 405-page document in 2021. It's a beast, but there is a lot of information, and I would highly recommend digging through it. It is available online in PDF form, and it's a lot, and we're proud of it. So the 5-year financial forecast has 2 main components. The target budget is the big overall summary of money in, money out, the operating result, what's in the fund balance, and then there are these key metrics. It's the fund balance and debt service compared as percentages of total expenditures. We'll talk about those in a second. There's also a forecast by department. I've already mentioned the operating result is revenues less expenditures. If it is a negative number, then we have a deficit. If it's a positive number, then we have a surplus, and it just builds the fund balance. The fund balance is the emergency funding. The ideal target is 2 months worth of expenses. And if you're thinking about the percentage as a total of expenditures, city code calls for at least 10%, but the goal is 12.5%, up to 16.7%. And that 16.7 number is 2 divided by 12. That implies we could spend 2 months worth and figure out what needs to happen to respond to an emergency. City code limits debt service expenditures to 12% of general fund expenditures. So there is a limit as to how many bonds we can take out to work on capital projects. And here's what it looks like. I'm not going to focus too much on the 2021 numbers because we do expect these to change with American Rescue funding once they've been targeted and approved. But you can see here we have prior year estimates and then the 5-year forecast. So you have all the revenues coming in their major categories, the expenditures going out in their major categories, and then on the right-hand side of the screen, in the document, it goes down into one sheet, but you can see the operating result, the anticipated fund balance, some transfers out. We've mentioned pay-go for capital and anything else, and then those key metrics down at the end. So this red circle is highlighted because for 20 and 21, you'll see that the expected fund balance percentage is less than 10%. I know I just said that we have to have it at 10% in city code. However, as part of the city's COVID response, we worked with city council to pass an ordinance last year that temporarily allows the fund balance to be less than 10%. By the end of this 5-year plan, it will be back to normal. And you can see that even in 2022, it's expected to be back there. And it's raining in the strip district. I feel like that's a given for capital and operating forums. So this is the 5-year financial forecast split up by by department. And this just gives you a look at what each division within the city is spending. Note that this page does include the most recent available actuals for final end of year as audited by the Controller's Office. So for the 21 budget, that was 2019. So let's talk about the actual descriptions of the fund balance. We have salaries and wages. This is the largest expense category in the operating budget. Hopefully you'll see why in a few minutes. This includes regular wages, acting pay, overtime, some uniform pay, longevity pay, and some other allowances. In 2021, it's budgeted at $224 million. We also budget for the city's share of Social Security and Medicare taxes as appropriate. So we have 28 departments, bureaus, and offices within the city of Pittsburgh. There are 10 labor units, over 3,000 full-time budgeted positions. That's why the salary number is high, including 900 budgeted police officers, 667 firefighters, 182 paramedics, 28 emergency medical technicians, 514 public works employees, including 178 environmental service employees, 36 full-time parks employees, plus part-time and seasonal employees, for parks in particular, but also citywide. So various local ordinances and state and federal statutes provide city employees certain rights, including rights to bargain about the terms and conditions of their employment with the city government. Operationally, this means that salaries, benefits, and work rules are determined for specific periods of time. And they have certain terms. And most of these changes for employee groups that are represented by a union must be negotiated. And just to go through this list, current union representation for City of Pittsburgh employees are as follows: the Fraternal Order of Police, Fort Pitt Lodge 1, the International Association of Firefighters, Local 1, PJCBC, Teamsters Local 249, AFSCME 2037, SEIU 668, SEIU 192B, AFSCME 2719, and the Fraternal Association of Professional Paramedics, Local 1. So these are 9 groups, and then the 10th would be the group of unions who are not unionized. The next major grouping of expenses are benefits. Full-time city employees are eligible for the following benefits, depending on their union status and those respective agreements that I just mentioned. Healthcare, vision, dental, life, long and short-term disability, accidental death and dismemberment. So some retirees are also eligible for benefits after they finish their active city employment. And these costs in the budget as published right now are $62.3 million. Just a quick slide, the city maintains a robust program to respond to workplace injuries and illnesses. That's our workers' compensation program that is managed and housed in the Department of Human Resources and Civil Service. And those budgeted costs are $17.4 million. Pension is always a big expense for the city as well. So the city's pension funds provide retirement benefits to eligible city employees. State Act 44 of 2009 sets requirements that the city must follow. Our aggregate pension funding level must remain above 50% to avoid state takeover of the fund. That would not be a good thing. As of the end of the first quarter, that liability balance was 69%, indicating a distress level of 2, which is moderate. It's very close to 70%, which is the threshold for a distress level 1 minimal. So we are getting a lot better, and we have over the year with some pretty intense fiscal oversight. It's getting better. It's still a long ways to go. And it does consist of some required payments. There's the minimum municipal obligation is the MMO. That number is set by the state each year, depending on current liabilities and assets. For 2021, it's $52.4 million. We have an arrangement, an internal grouping to shift part of our parking tax revenues into the pension fund every year. So that's $26.8 million. And when you add those two together, there's a good chance that it doesn't equal what our actuaries think we need to have going into the pension fund every year. So there's an amount called the actuarial recommended contribution. And City Code does call for an additional contribution so that we reach that amount. In 21, it is $19.8 million. And the city is committed to funding this amount moving forward. The city is also building an OPEB trust, other post-employment benefits, in an effort to better plan payments for retirees. Explicitly, those are some of the retiree healthcare benefits that I mentioned a few slides ago. So that, in theory, would get us a self-sustaining trust to pay for those instead of HR. Debt service is directly related to our capital projects. The city issues bonds on market to pay for capital projects, and the operating and capital budgets are linked through these debt issuances because we have to pay for these payments as part of the operating budget. So principal and interest payments occur on a set schedule for a fixed number of years. Those are available in the back of the document. And while more bond money would help pay for more infrastructure needs, that debt service would increase services available elsewhere in the city. So if we've tied up a lot of our money in paying for this infrastructure, that means we can't pay for something else. And we also have that debt percentage that I mentioned earlier. So in 2021, those costs are $57 million. So then what's left after you take out salaries and benefits, and pension and workers' comp and debt service is services and supplies. Service agreements allow the city to procure and pay for things to further enhance our city functions. These are the things that I mentioned earlier: professional services, independent auditing, memberships, training, other consulting projects, software. And then there's also other expenditures that supply city employees with the physical things that we need for work. This would be pens, paper, sticky notes, office supplies and furniture, technology, including phone and internet services, equipment, lease payments for rented space, and then utility payments at city facilities. So one thing to note, all purchases must be sourced appropriately according to city code. Procurement, which is one of the areas within the Office of Management and Budget, posts all bid opportunities and a buying plan on Beacon. And when these slides go up, you'll be able to link directly into that if you're interested in seeing the requests for professional service proposals. There are requests for low bid quotes. It's a very robust program, and it's all centrally housed within OMB. So what's in the 2021 document as approved by council right now, as it is still our legal document at this given moment? Just a very quick high-level overview. Almost 82% of our money in is tax revenue, and a little less than 19% is non-tax revenue. Non-tax revenue includes charges for services, fines, forfeitures, intergovernmental transfers, and miscellaneous things. Tax revenue, as the name implies, is really where we get most of our money in. And the biggest one is the real estate tax. So 32% of tax revenue is real estate. Then the next highest is earned income, payroll prep, parking, and then the Act 77 is the regional asset district tax relief. Because real estate is such a big chunk of money into the city, that's one of the reasons why during the pandemic last year, our cash flow wasn't as catastrophic as it could have been and as it was in some other cities. So because real estate is due at the beginning of the year, we had enough funding through that tax category to maintain spending throughout the year. On the expenditure side, this is what we call our subclasses. We label them 51, 52, 58, all the way to 58, and then we jump to 82. I couldn't tell you why, but you'll notice that these align with these major categories that I talked about earlier. So salaries and wages, benefits, which includes pension, healthcare, and workers' comp, professional and technical services, property services, other services, supplies, property, miscellaneous, and then 82 is debt service. So you really can see that 40% is salaries and wages. When you factor in the employee benefits, the city employee costs really are the driving factor of the operating budget. If you split it up by division, you'll see that public safety does have the largest spend. Public safety is our largest department, and it includes the Bureau of Administration, the Bureau of Emergency Medical Services, the Bureau of Police, the Bureau of Fire, and the Bureau of Animal Care and Control. So all of those things comprise that piece of the pie. The next largest is finance, and that is because pension and debt service are budgeted in the Department of Finance as they have oversight over those. Public Works is the the fourth largest category after general government. But Public Works does comprise the Bureau of Administration, Operations, Environmental Services, and Facilities. So general government is everything else. I split out human resources for this because that is where those retiree healthcare costs are budgeted at the moment. And workers, well, some legacy workers' comp payments as well. All right, so in terms of public engagement, what's next? It's important to engage with OMB and council budget and your council offices because we're directing your taxpayer dollars. Your input is critical. So the following activities are available on the Engage PGH website. I will pull this up in a minute so you can see it. There's a pre-recorded kickoff presentation. So if you're not tired of listening to me talk about the budget, that's a quick, short 5 to 10 minute video. It goes into some of the topics I covered earlier, but also it goes through a general understanding of the capital budget process and also what code and the home rule charter require of us. Attending this public forum or watching the recording, so good job, you've already done that. And then there is a survey online as well that we are asking you to complete that will give us critical insight into what you think as a resident. Other activities include reading through the 21 budget document, including the guides at the beginning, interacting with 311, departments, the mayor's office, and council offices. We really want to know what residents are thinking and how you think the city could be better. So public input will be reported to department directors, the mayor's office, and city council. It will also be summarized for constituents so that you are able to see it as well. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about a few of these items. So this survey is again housed on Engage PGH. The deadline is Sunday, July 11th, 2021. So what will happen after that is OMB will synthesize the results. We will share them with department directors. So they'll receive this data and they can use that data to influence their final budget requests. Those budget requests are due at the end of July. So this allows them to work some of your survey results and thoughts and comments into their requests. Given the timing and the remote nature of last year, that wasn't the case. So I'm very excited that we'll be able to work through that this year. And then the mayor's office and council offices will receive these results as well. And like we did last year, we will do a summary memo closer to the end of the year. So one thing that I didn't mention thus far, and if you have been paying attention to the Engage PGH site, you haven't seen is balancing act for operating. So this year's operating simulation will go live after the 2021 budget is amended to reflect American Rescue Plan funding. The total salary numbers will change pretty drastically. So those responses, if we get them now, it won't offer a true representation of your input. I don't think it's fair to the resident or to us to have a real sense of what your funding priorities are. So that will go live and we will make sure that that is communicated out appropriately. All right, so some resources for you. The 2022 budget engagement is all housed in one convenient place, engage.pittsburghpa.gov/2022 budgets. I'm about to pull that up. Contact information for the operating team is omboperating@pittsburghpa.gov. And then here, again, once these slides go up, you'll be able to click through to the OMB website where you can get operating budgets, capital budgets, the budget in brief, and quarterly reports. You can get all the same information on the council budget website as well. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing this for a second, pull up, oops, and pull up Engage PGH, and we'll run through it real fast. Okay, is that up? Leah, can you chime in real fast?
Yep, it's up.
Okay, thanks. So this is the 2022 City of Pittsburgh budgets page on Engage. And I hope you all have created an account, logged in, and followed your favorite projects. So here, if we just zip through it, on the right-hand side of the screen is where we have the budget engagement kickoff video. We've moved to the top the capital and operating budget survey. So the capital budget survey is first. If you have specific needs and projects in your neighborhood, this is where you would fill in that information. You can also rank the capital priorities there. And I'm zooming very fast and mostly so I can show you this really cool tool that I have filled out a few neighborhood projects. You can pinpoint where you want something to be considered. So if you click right here in Beachview, this says there are illegal dump sites in Upper Seldom Seen that detract from resident enjoyment. So then that will go to the capital team and they'll be able to comment on it. So below the geotag tool is where the operating budget survey lives. Like we said, it's a deadline of July 11th. You'll put your council district in. There's some optional demographic questions. And then it's just a general sense of, what are some things that you would want to increase revenue for? What are some things you would want to decrease revenue for? Is there anything creative you have? And then are there any things you would want to increase or decrease spending? A bunch of different categories: public safety, public works, parks, general government, etc. And then there are some text boxes where you can type in specific programs, ideas related to the operating budget. So again, don't forget that you have to figure out, okay, is this an operating project or is this a capital project? And then on the right-hand side of the page, you'll see the key dates. We're obviously in this forum right now, so this will finish out. The survey deadlines, and then there are recordings of the prior capital budgets. The one from last night should go up pretty soon. And then there's some more links to everything that I had mentioned earlier. Our website, last year's engagement, links to city council citizen participation hearing that'll go up later this year, watching meetings and budget forums, DOMI's paving list, DOMI's current projects, and then some actual downloadable things. This is where these slides will go up. So here in the budget simulations, this is where the operating simulation will go up eventually. And then there's a timeline, which we've mentioned before, and then who's listening. So Director Paulos, Assistant Director Hutchinson for capital, myself for operating, all of our teams, community affairs, the mayor's office, and we're all here for you. All right, I'll stop that sharing. And then the rest of my presentation literally just said questions. So I will stop there and see if we have anything to go through. I'll give you a few more minutes to work through it. All right. Well, that's all I have. So we really want to thank you. We do appreciate your time, your civic engagement. I want to thank the mayor's office, the Office of Community Affairs, the Department of Law assisted, Innovation and Performance, the City Channel team, the interpreters, and then everyone who was also on from City Council. And that's it. That's all I've got. So thank you so much. And we really hope you engage, keep engaging, take the surveys and fill things out for us. We love to hear from you.